We're here in the beautiful Amsterdam with Justin Bonds from Cyber Capital. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
All right. Looking at the markets, what do you think?
I think there's a lot of fear. It's obviously dropped a lot in the last few months, and we are obviously in a bear market, but I think it's good for people to have some perspective. This is the fifth cycle that the cryptocurrency market as a whole has been through now. So we've seen this cycle before, and it's simply fear and greed, and as far as I'm concerned, I think a lot of the recent developments have been very positive actually.
Can you name a few positive developments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ethereum obviously is continuing. The Ethereum Alliance obviously has a lot of prominent names within it. Casper and sharding is actually planned to be combined now in the same release. However, that release has been pushed back further to late 2019, which could also explain just some more negative sentiments in that regard towards Ethereum.
But you still have lots of confidence in Ethereum as a network, as a platform for this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously still the dominant platform for most projects, and we see most businesses adopting Ethereum for this utility, actually. And in my view, actually, I do agree with the design decisions that they're making in terms of working towards sharding and Casper, like I mentioned earlier. And I do think that they're going to solve some of the problems that they're going through now. I think the scalability, exactly. The advantage of something like Casper actually is that the blocks are non-deterministic actually, which means that if you can predetermine ahead of time who is going to mine a block, even if that's by 10 seconds, it solves a lot of the problems around propagation times and the orphaning issues that creates. So Ethereum with Casper hopes to solve a lot of those problems, which will allow a blockchain like Ethereum to scale much more.
How do we have to see Plasma? I mean, it's like this off-chain solution, like a plaster, actually.
Right. Yeah, we have Plasma. We have things like Lightning Network. We have things like Raiden, which is a Lightning Network type implementation over Ethereum. I mean, these are known as second layer solutions, and I think they're great. But I think really the applications is not a good replacement for on-chain transactions. They're extremely useful for specific applications, but certainly not all applications. I really do not consider second layers to be any sort of silver bullet, let's say.
If we look, maybe it's good to look at two alternatives in the market for Ethereum.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we can talk about EOS, for instance. What's your take on EOS? I mean,
so EOS is actually a very interesting project. I do like some of the engineering kind of trade-offs they made in that project, but recently the project's been going through a lot of problems actually, and ironically for a project that claimed to be cheaper and faster and so forth, it's currently more expensive to use than something like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that's actually due to one of the mechanisms in its design for RAM actually. So in EOS you have CPU, bandwidth and RAM that you need to pay for separately when you carry out any actions within the network, and they chose to actually put RAM on a type of order book that allows people to speculate over, and speculations became rampant and pushed up the price of RAM, increasing the price for all applications over the EOS network. So this has been, I suppose, quite a design flaw in its design and oversight. I think EOS is currently going through a lot of changes, and there's a lot to be skeptical about, but at the same time there's also a lot of interesting aspects to this system, and in my view I think also when blockchains fail sometimes we also learn more too. So
what makes EOS more interesting than Ethereum? I mean, what aspect brings them even further? I mean, is it the Turing complete?
Well, personally, I find Ethereum more interesting because it's a more decentralized system. But the thing that makes, I think, EOS interesting is in terms of the engineering trade-offs. In terms of we really have a spectrum of decentralization and centralization, and EOS actually fits somewhere in the middle there. So in terms of use cases, that actually might be interesting for some specific businesses that don't want extreme decentralization but also don't want to be completely centralized either. So I think in that sense EOS represents a type of niche, but I wouldn't consider it necessarily a direct competitor to a lot of the use cases that Ethereum represents.
And the other one we can mention is Cardano, ADA, of course. There was this debate on Twitter between Charles Hoskinson and Vitalik. I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes they are debating about very complex stuff.
Yeah.
How do you see such a debate? I mean, it's just...
I didn't follow that debate specifically actually, but I actually quite like Cardano. I think ultimately people will make different choices because a lot of these different designs, they do work, and it comes down to people's individual value judgments as well in terms of their beliefs and what they think is a more equitable or fair system per se. I like the design of Cardano. It's more of a direct proof of stake type system versus delegated proof of stake, which I think is very interesting. It also has a self-funding mechanism too, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of self-funding mechanisms, so I like Cardano a lot. The only thing that should be said about Cardano is we don't really have a functional network for another year, which is somewhat emblematic of the space that we're in, is that a non-completed project is worth multiple billions of dollars, so investors beware.
Maybe to explain the self-funding mechanism as a last question. I mean, actually the funds that are raised will be put in, of course, for the new development of the blockchain, or...
Yeah. So to explain a self-funding mechanism, there's a number of projects that do this actually, including Decreed and Pivx, and EOS even has a self-funding mechanism as well. But to put it very simply, in using Bitcoin as an example, in Bitcoin all of the block reward goes to the miners. With a self-funding mechanism, you basically take a part of that block reward aside and you put it into a type of treasury system. And ideally, you then have a decentralized voting system that then decides on proposals on where that funding could go. So that could go to development, that could go to outreach, that could go to lobbying. You could even set up decentralized call centers even if you wanted to. So the power of this, the kind of a positive feedback loop that creates, I think is very strong, which is why I'm a big fan of self-funding mechanisms. It also reduces the risks of any type of corporate capture and so forth. I think in many ways it makes it more decentralized, even arguably. So I'm a huge fan of this type of mechanism. It creates better governance in one word.
All right. Sounds good. Maybe some altcoin you want to mention? Some altcoin. You have a favorite one last month?
Sure. I have many projects that I quite like. Something I've been very interested in is the 0x protocol. I think the 0x protocol is very interesting. It actually has a shared liquidity across exchanges using a decentralized protocol, and actually ownership over your own money if you're using such an exchange. So that opens up a lot of possibilities. Another project I might mention that we've been very interested in recently is a project called co-vesting. They're setting up an exchange and also going to have copy trading built into their system. Copy trading, so you can actually copy the trades of other traders and kind
What's
of
the name?
follow them. Co-vesting, actually. We think it has a good token economics, essentially. This is one of the things we look into very specifically in order to look at the value proposition of a project. So,
all right. Thank you very much, Justin,
thank you very much.
and all the best.
Thank you.
All right.